Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Dalmar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of statewide news service, jbiztechvalley.com, and as you can see, he is the columnist for the Jewish Press.
Yeah, I have a column in there called The Albany Beat, and it talks about how government relates to the Jewish community, or doesn't, as the case may be. And we have a perfect guest that dovetails all of this in Bennett Liebman. He's with the Government Law Center at Albany Law School. So welcome to the Jewish View.
It's my pleasure.
And
thank you for having me.
do we call you Ben or Bennett?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Okay. So I just wanted to ask you, what do you do with the Government Law Center? Because you came back.
I'm retired. I'm a volunteer there. I simply, they let me write on anything I want to, and let
Any
me
topic,
blog,
you mean?
most any topic,
Okay.
which tends to be at times. A lot of times it's on gambling issues, and a decent amount of the time it's on New York State government issues. And I've been working in part as trying to work with Beth Emeth as a way of just studying their history, because they do go back since 1838.
Right.
I've not been able to basically get everything together, but I would say that the first rabbi at Beth Emeth, Rabbi Wise, was a very good friend of one of the founders of Albany Law School. So there is some sort of connection between Albany Law School and Beth Emeth.
Well, I got to tell you, the county clerk's office, Albany County Clerk's office, has a lot of historical data, and you should check that out in their archives, because I found a lot when I was researching Congregation Beth Abraham Jacob's history, because that's where Beth Emeth evolved out of, was sort of the a long time predecessor.
In 1841,
right. There was a fight.
There was a smaller fight. There was a bigger fight in 1850.
Okay.
But in 1841, a good part of the Polish, more Orthodox portion of what was then Beth Emeth, which was then Bethel,
Right.
left to find Bethel Jacob. And
Which is on Herkimer Street now.
Part of the issue was that, part of it was an observance issue, but a lot of the issue really was an ethnic issue, as almost all of the other members at Bethel were German, and the people who left were of Polish origin. So that's been an ongoing issue throughout the Jewish community in Albany, where you had at the turn of the century almost a time when all the old German Jews belonged to Beth Emeth, and the Russian Jews who were coming over in great numbers at the turn of the century belonged to all the other synagogues in Albany. But really, for many, many years, Beth Emeth was the German Jewish synagogue.
And there was only Orthodox, except for Beth Emeth, when they broke away in 1850. But
Yes.
that was the only. But
Beth
they were
Emeth
really
breaks
all
off
Orthodox.
to Old Bethel, which continues Orthodox, and to Anshe Emeth, basically Isaac Mayer Wise's group, which becomes the fourth oldest
Right.
Reform synagogue
in the
But
country.
it's more than that, because Wise really was Reform Judaism. He was the founder. You can call him anything, but whether people used to call him the Moses of American
Reform Judaism.
Yeah, and he was that. So while the other three congregations really weren't pushing, they were just happy to be where they were. Wise was the person trying to make Reform Judaism the Judaism of the American Jewish community, which was then really the German Jewish community.
And he moved right after 1850, like 2 years later or whatever.
1854, he moves to Cincinnati.
There was stop in Pittsburgh first.
No, he's in Cincinnati.
Okay.
Pittsburgh is one of the main locations for one of the Reform synods over the years, where they where they tried to iron out their differences among the Reform rabbis. So you had synods in Pittsburgh, you had one in Cleveland, over, and major differences between the Reform rabbis of that era. Some were, David Einhorn in Baltimore was far more, I don't want to say left-wing, but he was far more Reform than Wise was. And Wise was a very contentious person.
Yeah.
He would have been right at home in politics because he believed in the Ronald Reagan motto: if you're explaining, you're losing. So if people would attack Wise would never respond to their attacks. He'd just attack them. So you had a movement on the Reform side in the years that Wise was an important figure, which is really 1850 up until really 1890, when he's still there, but he doesn't really work as hard, where Wise's role was basically fighting with everybody else in the Reform community.
But he did have one really pertinent act that he did in 1864 when he went right after Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address. He went to the White House and he saw President Lincoln with, I think, 3 other rabbis, maybe 2 other rabbis, and they talked to him about what Ulysses S. Grant was doing in the South.
Yes.
And kicking out the Jews from the South, and that meeting prompted President Lincoln to order General Grant to reverse his order.
Wise was, to his credit, was a one-man B'nai B'rith by himself. He was a one-person anti-defamation.
Well, did I get the?
Well,
did
it's
I get
a little
the
bit
story
earlier
Okay.
because it was basically 1862. But immediately once this happened, Wise sprung into action, which he often did. Which was, you cannot attack It seems odd for us in the 21st century that here's this figure in the 19th century. You did not attack Jewry without Rabbi Wise going after you. That was a lot of issues can come up about his devotion to liturgy and how committed he was to any practice. But if you attacked a Jewry, he went after you. He did not stop.
Did you go to the Jewish Museum in Philadelphia?
I've been there about 25 years ago, but I haven't been there
This is a new museum that just opened up relatively within the last 10 years probably. And I would think that maybe you should go visit because they have a whole, and maybe you could correct some of their history, what they're claiming, but they have a whole big thing about Mayor Wise and what his efforts were, and I just think
he was
you would either be able to add to what they have or you could correct what they have, but there's a lot of things going on that.
My favorite thing about Wise and Albany is, again, dealing with the state, is that Wise was not being paid a very large sum,
Right.
And he started off, I think, at $250 a year in 1846. And he had a lot of kids. He had a need for money. And when the synagogues break off in 1850, and he's left with less than half the members, he needs funds.
Mm-hmm.
But because he was a very good mixer, and he ends up being hired to work in the state library, because he's friends with Thurlow Weed, who is the main Republican leader in New York State, and arguably the main backdoor leader in the country. And but Wise has befriended him, and he needs money. They get him a job in the state. Mm-hmm. So we have a major movement in American Jewry, which comes out of the state library, which is in the state capitol.
Now, who was governor at the time?
Um,
I'll test your memory.
I'm not sure whether it was.
Remember, you have to remember 150 years ago.
Well,
right?
I
Not
have enough
that
problems
old, though.
remembering what I had for breakfast.
In
I think George
1850
Washington Hunt might have been the governor at that time, because being there and working in the state library, it's very easy. Wise becomes the first rabbi to open up a session of the New York legislature,
Oh,
because
wow.
he's right there. So he just, if he's working there, he can just walk in and open the session. But Wise is the first
clergy.
first Jewish clergy to open up a session of the legislature in New York, and the second really nationwide. But that's because he was working there. He largely lived in the state library, which is part of the old state capitol. It's very hard for us to look back and see a major religious movement coming out of the state capitol, but that's the case with Wise and Reform Jewry. He spent most of his time hanging out in the capitol, in the state library. When he was here.
Can you give us your take on what that fight was about in 1850 on Rosh Hashanah?
You can find all kinds. There are two sort of versions.
Yeah.
First of all, Wise was a tremendous politician, and not necessarily in a wonderful way of saying that. So
It's like a
Wise's
Donald Trump
Wise's
type of politician.
Wise's version is Wise would like it to be. I was too reformed for them.
Mm-hmm.
They just couldn't. My pace of reform was not something that anyone could deal with. There were other inside the synagogue. There appeared to be, that was definitely the case, but there were other issues in terms of Wise not dealing properly with the management of the synagogue. He wouldn't provide them with his speeches in advance. He wouldn't tell them even afterwards. They'd ask him, okay, could we get a copy of what you wrote? No. He called out a member of the Board of Trustees for working on the Sabbath. We might think of as Wise as being far more liberal or less orthodox, but one of the things that Wise really believed in was the sanctity of the Sabbath. So he sent out a nasty letter saying, "You got to stop that, or I'm going to make sure you're thrown off the board." He complained about whether or not the meat was properly koshered. There were other issues he had. So
But really, you have to redefine, because there's different terms.
Yeah.
That would be different than a Reform rabbi today.
yes, certainly, but Wise had a different view of life, and the main thing for him was you could not work on the Sabbath.
And kosher food was
The way it was. So so there were a lot. Wise is, especially later, because nobody wrote as much as Wise did. He went to Cincinnati. He put out his own English-speaking newspaper, his own German-speaking newspaper. He was everywhere. If you want to look at Donald Trump type thing, yes, he was everywhere. But he did everything with a little bit of nastiness for his enemies.
So how did this fight come about?
The leadership of the synagogue basically tried to get him to account for what they saw was they issued a set of charges. He basically refused to respond to his charges. They suspended his pay, which was one of the reasons why he needed outside work. And a few days before Rosh Hashanah in 1850, they had a general meeting of the membership, and while Wise claims otherwise, it appears that he was voted out. Services the next day, Wise's friends had sort of bought him a position where he could go up, basically open the Torah,
Right.
open the Ark. And he gets up, he's not on the bema, but he gets up from his seat, which is in like the front row, and he walks up towards the Ark to open it because he believes he's entitled to it, and the president of the synagogue just beats the crap out of him.
Literally? I mean, there was a physical fight?
Yes, there was a major physical fight,
Right.
and in fact, a riot broke out in the synagogue.
And rolled out into the street.
Supposedly.
And, well, the newspaper story had it where the police came.
Police came, they
put an
arrested
end-
everybody, and that was.
And there was, I saw the newspaper article about
Yeah.
it. It says you can, it's on
Something like
microfiche.
big fight in Jewish church.
So they rolled it out, and then they put an end to the services.
Put an end to the services. Wise's secessionists hold the second day of Rosh Hashanah in Wise's home. Then they move to a razor strop factory for a year or so before he's able to raise enough money to establish a separate synagogue for Anshe Emeth.
And where was that?
It's at the corner of Madison and Pearl.
Oh, okay. So that's where that first synagogue.
Their first
Reform,
synagogue was.
yeah.
So where they stayed until the late 1880s when Bethel and Anshe Emeth reconnected and had the synagogue built at Lancaster and
Where the Billboard Temple is.
yes,
Right.
the beautiful.
Well, they still have the
beautiful.
Jewish stars on the back of their pews.
Yeah.
And there's other ways of still identifying that building as a one-time synagogue, you know.
And B'nai Shalom bought the Ark
Yes.
to put into its own synagogue, which was very
It's-
extremely ornate.
Yeah.
And that synagogue, especially for 1885 or 1889 when it first opened, cost a fortune. I mean,
Mhm.
it's really one of the major synagogue constructions of its time, and I think in large measure shows to reflect the prosperity at that time of the German Jewish members of Beth Emeth,
Mm-hmm.
because like it or
When was
not,
that of the Swan Street Temple?
Yeah, Swan and Lancaster, yeah.
from 1889 to 1957.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful structure.
And Herbert
It really is.
Governor Liebman, Herbert Liebman would go to services at that because, back when in the 30s when he was governor, they really had, Albany wasn't built up the way it is now. So that was the closest synagogue to the capital.
Plus,
so
he was Reform, and that was
Okay.
the place for him to go. Going over the records at Beth Emeth, there was at least one time when Franklin Roosevelt, when he was governor, gave a speech at Beth Emeth as well.
And
Really, you walked over there?
What? Yeah.
You walked over?
Well, he was wheeled or whatever.
Wheeled over.
He made it.
Sorry.
He made it there. He made it there.
And I was in the 1980s. Jesse Jackson came to speak at the Wilborn Temple, and I asked him how it felt speaking at a former synagogue, and he's talked about the Rainbow Coalition, and it was like we got into this whole thing, but I had a chance to ask him about this.
But really, I mean,
That was
that's-
right after his
I mean-
derogatory comment about New York City Jews.
But that's really, that if you looked into, let's say, New York City in the 1980s, and you saw
1980s.
if you look, there were so many, former synagogues, let's say in Harlem or East New York
yeah.
or Brownsville, that had become churches at that time.
Well, it's interesting because the Maimonides Hebrew Day School, the Jewish Orthodox Day School, it was Temple Israel, became a church,
Yeah.
and now it's an Orthodox Day School over here. So things go.
Yeah.
And now Harlem is becoming not a Jewish neighborhood, but it's
It's
gentrified.
it's certainly gentrified.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you about your another passion that you have is about gambling. And not that you like gambling, but I mean, I'm trying to find the right words out of respect, but you like to
I like to follow
Okay.
the issues involving gambling. It's a bad thing that happened. I can blame it on all kinds of things, but my parents and my grandmother lived 3 blocks from Aqueduct Racetrack. The high school that I went to, you could see the harness track Roosevelt Raceway from the high school. But what just happened was I just got in with different people when I was in college.
But you were on the governor's gambling task force or something to that effect, or you were
I
an advisor?
I was on the racing and wagering board during both governors Mario Cuomo and George Pataki.
Okay.
So,
But then under this governor, Andrew
I was
Cuomo, you
deputy
had,
secretary for gaming and racing.
right, and you were involved with advising him about where the new casinos should be or something? I wasn't
we
sure.
We help write the legislation for casinos.
Mm-hmm. And
So you say you're against gambling? Is
I'm
that
not against gambling. I'm not exactly a passionate gambler. Having 2 kids and trying to pay for private colleges has put a dent in anything I might wager. But I don't have any. I just don't. I've never really seen it as a vice. I've just seen it as largely as another entertainment option, an entertainment option which has some problems with it in the sense that certain people can largely get addicted to it, and the state really does need to step up and provide services to those people who are affected by gambling.
But you, now where they're talking about, I don't know if you had no idea of where these casinos would be located or anything like that, but you did, one of the big things that I've been on a few people's backs about is that you go to Saratoga Racecourse, which is a state-owned raceway now, and you don't have any kosher food there, but you got an Italian day, and you have a Mexican day, and you have other types of ethnic days, but you don't have anything honoring Jewish. And I asked the head of the Saratoga Racecourse about it, and he says, "Oh, so you'd just like for us to have another type of ethnic day?" And I said, "Yes, I'm not saying you should get rid of them, but you should have another type." And then they just never did it. And then, and here we have a 9-part festival, Saratoga Festival, going on, and they don't incorporate any of that into the racetrack. Yeah. There's a Jewish festival going on through the summer, and it was one of my pet peeves.
I don't have that much understanding as to what actually goes on into the mentality of the New York Racing Association. And I was a board member there from 2008 to 2011, but current management is not.
Do you think it should go back to being a privately run?
There's so many issues here. I don't think anybody disagrees that it should go back to private. The question is, how do you construct the board, and how much right, given the state's investment in the industry, does the public have in finding out how the racing association runs? I mean, should the open meetings law continue to apply? Should freedom of information law continue to apply? I think those really are. And how do you construct the board? Those are significant issues, and I'd like to, personally,
Yeah.
I see no reason why NYRA should not, even if it's private, at least have its meetings open and have its records open. I look back at time, and even when NYRA was private at the state, or people wanted to find out how much people were making at NYRA, they found out. So that in 1964, I believe, the controller did the controller audits NYRA, so you find out what happened there, and yet there's no recognition of their duties to the public. They really need, even if they become private, there still should be certain public responsibilities that they need to deal with.
And what about given your law background, your background with Albany Law School and government law. What do you have an opinion about what you see going on in terms of the ethics challenged lawmakers, ethically challenged lawmakers, or do you have any thoughts on
Everything
that?
sickens me, but I just don't know what the answer is. I mean, I've been
Well,
around.
it could be that, some people throw out higher pay scales so they wouldn't have to feel the need to pull from illegal
Because you
means.
can't really legislate ethics.
It bothers me because we've seen major ethics reforms in the 1950s, due at that time, of course, to legislature get involvement in horse racing and harness tracks, as the many people in the legislature tried to figure out ways where they could own harness tracks, which were then seen as the vehicle for printing money. In the 60s and 70s, and like Watergate issues. We saw it in the 80s with reforms after New York City issues. We saw it. Governor Spitzer comes in 2007. Governor Cuomo comes in 2011. There's major ethics reform, and there just needs to be It's easy to say, well, there are certain problems with our laws. I mean, convicted felons shouldn't get pensions. The money from LLCs, those contributions make no sense. But I've yet to see a serious review of whether campaign financing or campaign finance law will actually work. And I've always supported it in an era where Citizens United largely allows people to make unlimited contributions to the candidates of their choice. So I'd like to see something more done. I'm somewhat dubious of how successful this is, given how often New York has enacted what was considered major ethics reforms. But at the same time, there's a feeling that something should be done. Some things will be helpful, but unless we just almost get a total new attitude in view of this, whatever limited ethics reform we'll get will not really change the basic parts.
Have you did you follow the Shelley Silver trial at all? Or?
At times to try to deal with it, but not as much as I probably wanted to. One of the advantages of being retired is saying, I don't have to follow this. So,
but you might, as a passion, might be in your blood, you might want to just see what was going on, and the New York Times did a wonderful job, covering it.
I never know. I mean, having been a hearing officer, unless you have this feeling that unless you're there seeing it on a day-to-day basis, you never seem to know exactly what's going on.
Well, let me ask you just on the thing, if he's with a law firm that is giving him referral fees, which is legal, and then he gets grants and he hooks up with this other doctor, and he's getting, and he's, wherever possible for this cancer research, he's getting this doctor grants, and the doctor is referring patients to the law firm. I mean, is that a quid pro quo? You know what the word quid pro quo means better than anyone.
I don't know, but all I know is the jury apparently, the jury believed that.
That's what I didn't, think was. So, I mean,
but that's obviously going to be the nature of the speaker's appeal, which is that there was no quid pro quo. The doctor said there was no quid pro quo.
And then on the other case with the commercial real estate, most of those jurors were either, black or Hispanic. There were like 2 or 3 whites on the jury. And here you talked about how he took money from the commercial real estate, but he fostered all this legislation that was extremely pro-tenant. And you know that these people who were sitting there probably were tenants. And this is a guy who was on their side as a pro-tenant.
I think the government did a convincing job that he was not really on their side. That even the votes were that he did enough basically to make sure that the management at Glenwood got what it maybe they didn't get all they wanted, but they got what they needed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So So, I mean, that's the way the jury saw it. We'll see what the
Appeal.
Second Circuit says.
Is it in the Second Circuit?
It will go to the federal Second Circuit, because that's New York
Okay.
and Vermont.
And what do you think about the Dean Scalos thing? Is that more of a cut and dry thing where?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
I just don't know. I mean, it's, I mean, again, these cases, it's nice to draw little bits from what you see in the newspapers, but unless you're there,
Yeah.
you're following everything, you just never know
Right.
what's happening. I mean, I can only say the only federal trial that I ever went to religiously was more than 40 years ago, was a harness fixing case in a federal court in Brooklyn. So that's the only case I could speak to about what was happening in life.
Okay.
All right, listen, Ben, you're doing good work. You did good work for the people of New York State in the past, but don't want you to let you retire. We want you to use your knowledge and your expertise to help more people, but keep on going and do it with good health.
And much success, yes.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.